Hello, I'm going to be speaking about rent review in commercial leases. Almost all long-term commercial property leases will include a mechanism for rent review. This is logical. The appropriate rent for a premises in a year's time, for example, is unlikely to be appropriate in 10 years' time. For this reason, the landlord will want a provision in place which enables them to review the rent on a regular basis, but also provides the tenant with rights to challenge any rises that the landlord decides to impose. How often will I have a rent review? The way in which a rent review will work in any particular lease agreement depends on the terms of the lease. Where the lease is short, there may not be any rent review clauses at all, and in that case, there can't be any rent increases. Typically, however, a rent review clause allows for the rent to be reviewed at an agreed frequency. It may be every year, every 3 years, or some other frequency. It is advantageous for the tenant that this period is as long as possible, as it is very rare for the rent to go anywhere but up. How is the new rent calculated? Once the period for the rent review has been determined, the next step is to look at how the new rent will be calculated. This provides the landlord with rules on how they must determine the revised rent that is going to be charged. Although this can be done in several ways, the lease agreement states that there are common mechanisms by which the rent review is calculated. Open market rental value is particularly common as an approach, meaning that the rent is determined based on what a landlord could expect to achieve if they were to rent on the open market at that point in time. Particular worries from the tenant's point of view would be if they had an initial cheaper period of rent, then the step up could be quite substantial. The rent review could be fixed to some point of reference, such as the retail or consumer prices index. In some cases, there could be clauses which relate to specific percentage increases, although this type of approach should be looked at with caution, as there is no flexibility to take into account the changes in the current open market at any point in time. What happens if I don't agree with the new rent, or simply can't or won't pay? When the landlord is looking to review the rent, there will typically be a set of rules contained within the lease. You can find these in the rent review section. This means that the landlord will need to give a notice period to the tenant that a review is imminent and a proposal of how much the revised rent may be. During this period, which is normally a few months, the tenant can write to the landlord with any objections as to the rise. Where there are objections and the two parties cannot negotiate a reasonable rental figure, it may be necessary to refer the dispute to an independent surveyor, expert, or arbitrator. Ultimately, there is a likelihood that there may be a clause in the lease which allows the tenant to terminate the lease if they're not happy with the new rent. So you would need to check the lease that you have, and it is an important point for new leases to have this particular type of break clause. All of these issues need to be considered up front when negotiating a new lease if both parties want to avoid a costly and drawn out argument in the future.